cameras, shutter speed, aperture, ISO. What do all these things mean? Well, today we're gonna find out. What's going on, everybody? If you're new around here, my name's Finn Badgley. I'm a commercial fashion portrait photographer, and I'm walking you through the camera basics today so you can really get started creating some beautiful photos and videos. So right off the bat, we're talking shutter speed. First thing you want to know, the higher the shutter speed number, or the smaller the fraction, the shorter your shutter is open, the less light gets into the photo, and the sharper your photo will be. The lower the number, or the larger the fraction, the longer your shutter will be open for, letting in more light, and the blurrier your image will be if you're not on a tripod or if you are hand holding. A good rule of thumb for when you're taking photos handheld is to have your shutter speed at 1 over whatever your focal length is. So if you're photographing at 200 millimeters, you would want your shutter speed to be 1 over 200th. Pretty simple. Now on to aperture. Aperture is the size of the hole in the lens letting light in. There's f-stops and there's t-stops. T-stops is more in the cinema world. F-stops is the more common one in photo and also in video. The larger the hole, the more light is let in, and the blurrier the background will be. We are talking f1.8, 2.8, f4 for example, and the smaller the hole, the less light is getting to the sensor, meaning the photo is darker and more of the background is in focus. If you think, you hold your finger up like that in front of you and you look through it, pretty much everything's going to be in focus. That is the same kind of deal when you look at something like an f22, an f16, for example. And lastly, we have ISO. This is your camera sensor's sensitivity to light. Essentially, the higher number you go, the more sensitive to light it is, and the brighter your image will be. Now, just like everything else, this comes hand in hand with something, and that is grain. So the higher that number you go, the more grain is going to be in your photo. The lower the number, the less grain will be in your photo. ISO 100, you're going to have little to no grain. ISO 12800, you're going to have a lot of grain. You can see in these examples the difference in the amount of grain as you go up the ISO range. Now, all these things come together to create what is known as the exposure triangle, and this is how you properly expose a photo or video. So if you want that blurry background look, you're going to shoot with a wider aperture. When you hear people call a lens fast, this is what they're referring to, is if the aperture opens quite wide. This is something like a 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, for example. Whereas if stylistically you want to include more information in the background, or you're shooting a product that you have a lot of detail and you want the whole thing to be in focus, that's when you're going to want to shoot at f22, f16, f11, for example. And if you want to get those nice light trails at night, cars going by, etc., you're going to want to shoot at a slower shutter speed, say 1/15 of a second, half a second, even whole seconds, if you will. That way you can get more light in the photo, and those light trails going across will be captured the whole way, and it can create a really pleasing image. This is the same kind of thing when you see the long exposure photographs of water where it looks all silky smooth. You have that at like a 20-second exposure, it's going to look really smooth and nice. Now that said, if you're shooting fast action or somebody running, or like a boxing match or something, for example, you're going to want a higher shutter speed, like 1/500th of a second. In those circumstances, you're probably going to need to raise your ISO. A lot of the cameras made today have decent ISO ranges and don't get a lot of grain. Now, if your ISO gets too high, you will notice a lot of grain in the photo. Some people like this stylistically, it gives that film grain kind of effect, but it varies person to person and what your personal style is and how you use these 3 settings to craft your personal style and what you like in an image. Now, with all that said, I hope you found this informative. If you did, drop a like, leave a comment if this is the kind of thing you like to see, if you want to see more of this, more camera basics from me in the future. Subscribe, hit the bell to be notified when I post new videos, and I'll see you on the next one.